What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. First off, I just want to say thank you all so much for 6,000 subscribers. I will be coming out with a Q&A soon, but right now I wanted to post this video because it was highly requested. Though we are not 100% sure that this is actually going to Cedar Point, many signs are pointing to it, and many people are asking me to keep doing these videos on predicting the Gerstlauer at Cedar Point, so if it doesn't end up going to Cedar Point, at least I impressed a few of you during the way. But anyway, today we are going to get into what could a Cedar Point Gerstlauer actually feature. We already talked about a general talk about it, and then we talked about exactly where in the park this Gerstlauer could be, but now I want to talk about something even more specific than those two. What could it feature, what could we see on this ride, and most importantly, what records will this ride break? This is Cedar Flags, and today we will be predicting what a Cedar Point Gerstlauer could feature. Before I get into this video, I just want to say that only about 21% of all of my viewers are subscribed to my channel, which is only about a fifth of all of my viewers. So, if you're into my stuff, then click the subscribe button and catch up on my content. The very first thing I want to focus on is the theming of the ride. Now we know that Cedar Fair isn't the best at theming. When it comes to theming, companies like Hershend, Universal, and Disney, they do pretty well. And for international recognition, I'd say Merlin does insane theming as well. But when it comes to parks like Cedar Fair parks or Six Flags parks, they're not really the strongest. They usually build the coaster just to build the coaster and provide thrills to thrill seekers and enthusiasts all across the world. That is fine, but Cedar Fair does like to have original themes. Looking at you, Six Flags. We do know for a fact that I'm a Score is coming next year with a Cedar Point soundtrack, and we know when I'm a Score comes out with a soundtrack, it's usually for a brand new roller coaster. There's no way that Cedar Fair would put a soundtrack on an existing coaster, would they? But let's get into the actual theme. I say there are two possible themes for this ride, and let's focus on those. One being in the front of the park and one being in the back of the park. The first theme I would see would definitely be if the coaster was in the front of the park, and it would be a boardwalk theme. It would be something similar to Hang Time at Knott's, but maybe a little more inclusive. I could definitely see a lot of inspiration from Hang Time at Knott's when they come to the theming. I could actually see a very similar theme to this, a very nice boardwalk beachside theme, but at the same time I could see a little bit of difference between the two. Just like how Mystic Timbers and Twisted Timbers, they have very similar themes, but there are a lot of differences that separate the rides apart and create their own independent themes. Now, if this ride was in the back of the park, I could actually see something similar to Mystic Timbers or Twisted Timbers. The thing about the theming of Mystic Timbers and Twisted Timbers is about the haunted woods. And let me just say that the back of the park has a lot of wooded theming. I know the very back is Wild West themed, but that middle part of the park, you have a lot of Snake River theming, you have a Cedar Creek theme, you have a lot of that stuff. So maybe you could do something similar to that and create a haunted style theme for this ride. Like I said, it would be themed to something similar to Mystic Timbers or Twisted Timbers, and would definitely be in the woods. It would have a great wilderness landscape, and man, there are some really good names I could think of this, like Wilderness Run. Oh wait. But anyway, I don't really see a Wild West theme with this ride because Cedar Point has been focusing a lot on that section of the park. The park section of the Wild West area is so much different from what it was in 2017. Now the Frontier Town and Frontier Trail are a lot more interactive. There's a whole new area called Forbidden Frontier, and I would say it's pretty up to date with new Cedar Fair standards. And when it comes to the front of the park, I would love to see a boardwalk overhaul just like we saw with the Frontier Town and Frontier Trail areas, but at the same time, a man could dream. Now we go into the statistics of the ride. Now, I did a lot of research for this, looking at other Gerstlauer roller coasters and seeing what the stats of those are. And in this category, I want to go with both the stats and the record breakers in this one. So let's get right into that. The first stat I want to talk about is height. Now, height's a very complicated one because we know the history of Cedar Point and how they like to add rides over 200 feet, but I don't see this ride being a hypercoaster. But at the same time, I could see it being extremely close. Look at a ride like the Karnen at Hansa Park, that is over 200 feet. And then look at some of these other major Gerstlauers like Monster at Adventureland or TMNT Shellraiser. These rides fall into the 100 to 150 foot range. Now, I could definitely see something taller than those rides, but shorter than the Karnen. And why don't I see it being a hyper? Well, I'll get into that in the next category. I could see this ride being around 180 feet tall. Of course, it could be a little taller or a little shorter. I could see something maybe on the shorter side, maybe 150 to 180 feet. And once again, there is a reason that I will get to later on this, but right now I'm going to say 180. When it comes to the speed, I'm going to say maybe around 65 to 70 miles an hour, maybe something even shorter than that, and I'll get to why that is later again. Now the length is a pretty interesting one. I could see this being a pretty hefty ride, maybe something around 4,000 to 5,000 feet of track. Yeah, that is right, that is a long ride. And this ride, honestly, I could definitely see it being very long. I could see Cedar Point really going for all of this, and I could definitely see a bunch of elements on this ride as well. Now, here's where we get to the record breakers. We have two main record breakers. It is the angle of descent with the steepest drop in the world, and the inversion count with the most inversions in the world. If there is something Cedar Point is really good at, it's marketing, and they always love to break records. Now, when it comes to the angle of descent, I don't see them going too far over the 123 descent mark, but I could definitely see 123 being a pretty good number to round it out. When it comes to the inversion count, I honestly have no clue. It could be 15, it could be 20, but I definitely don't see anything over 20. I could see something in between 15 and 20, maybe 16 to round it out as an even number, and call it a day. I definitely could see a bunch of inversions on this ride, and see this ride absolutely fly through those. And I could see a layout very similar to the Smiler or TMNT Shellraiser, and at the same time break all of these inversions with multiple trains going through the course. Now, let's get into the ride's layout. Finally, we are talking about the overall layout of this ride. This is a pretty generic section of the video because I'm going to be talking about a lot in this section, so let's get right to it. First of all, overall, I could see this being once again a mix between TMNT Shellraiser and the Smiler. I could definitely see a very big drop, something like that, and then having a massive spaghetti bowl section just like the Smiler. Now, why do I say it's similar to TMNT Shellraiser? Well, I could see both a launch and a lift on this ride. I know Maverick has something similar, but that one lift is basically a launch, so this would be the first ride at Cedar Point to incorporate both a chain lift and a launch. This would be very good on block sections, and would definitely be a very standout attraction at the park. I could see this ride having two main halves of the ride, just like something like TMNT Shellraiser, and I could see it starting off with the launch. Only because if it started off with the lift, I feel like people would compare it a lot to something like Maverick, but at the same time, I could definitely see a lot of differences between this and something like TMNT. And I could definitely see this ride being one of a kind, extremely unique, and maybe even a multi-launch. I'll get into that in a little bit, but right now, I want to talk about some of the elements I could see on this ride. I could see the ride starting off with a JoJo roll element. Maybe not something like a traditional JoJo roll, maybe something like on the Smiler, how it makes a little bit of a turn into a speedy JoJo roll, and it could start off the ride. I know a few other Gerstlauers do this like the aforementioned TMNT Shellraiser, and I could definitely see this being at Cedar Point. Going for the inversion record, maybe there could be 2 of these JoJo rolls before the ride starts. Now, we get into an idea I randomly thought of while writing the script for this video. I would love, and I mean love, to see a multi-pass launch on this ride. Now, I know capacity issues would be a problem, but I could definitely see something like Pantheon where it goes right onto the multi-pass instead of starting off in the multi-pass, like something like a Skyrocket 2 or the aforementioned Wicked Twister. But anyway, talking about a multi-pass launch, I could definitely see it going forwards once, backwards once, and maybe into a spiral, something like Fury at Bobbyland even, and then going into the next launch, which will catapult the riders forwards and into the first massive inversion on the ride. After that, I could definitely see a good spaghetti bowl on the ride, something like the Smiler, maybe something that could intertwine with the next block section with the train passing through it, maybe even have a dueling sort of element. I could definitely see if this ride replaces Gemini, you could have maybe something like a loose Mobius loop. Like the first block section will interact with the second block section. Maybe you have something like a Top Gun stall, or something similar to that. Maybe I'm thinking too much into this. But at the same time, I can definitely see a lot of interaction with the track, maybe a few near miss elements, and a lot of tight turns and transitions. After that, I could see the ride stopping and then going into a massive vertical lift hill. Once again, that would be where the ride reaches its top height of 180 feet approximately, and then goes over into a absolutely massive 123-degree drop. These are all predictions once again, and I could definitely see the ride going to, once again, another spaghetti bowl after this, once again interacting with the last block section. When it comes to the actual elements that I could see filling these spaghetti bowls, I could see multiple double inversions like a sea serpent roll, a banana roll, and a cobra roll, and maybe even a first-of-a-kind element or two. Gerstlauer is a very experimental manufacturer. Look at something like Carnan, and then look at something like the Smiler, and then look at something like Typhoon. I mean, these rides are so different, and I love it so much. Maybe you could even have one half of the ride go completely backwards. That would be super scary. And let me just say, that would be great. But once again, that would be a lot of technical aspects for this ride, and I know Cedar Fair doesn't like to go too experimental now, but at the same time, I could definitely see them going with Gerstlauer because Gerstlauer is a very nice choice. But anyway, that is my video. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, do all of that stuff. Even if you didn't like the video, click on that dislike button if you really want to. But anyway, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. What could you see in a Cedar Point Gerstlauer? What do you think you could see for me talking about Gerstlauers in the future? And when do you think this ride will be announced? Let me know in the comments. This is Cedar Flags, and I'll see you all later.